All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're putting on our detective hats. Lexical detectives, to be exact. Look, we live in this absolutely incredible era where we've got lightning-fast access to ancient texts right in our pockets. But what if I told you that these modern digital tools might actually be hiding the original ancient meanings of Scripture? Let's dive in and see what's really going on. Let's kick things off with a pretty shocking truth. Just because we have superpowered software like Logos or Accordance right at our fingertips, well, that doesn't automatically mean we understand the text any better. In fact, as this quote points out, the sheer saturation of digital data often just accelerates our linguistic mistakes. We're essentially just making errors, a whole lot faster. So we really have to stop and ask ourselves, if you can click on a Greek root and get a definition in 2 seconds flat, is that actually giving you the truth? Or is it just speeding up our modern misunderstandings? Because access is definitely not comprehension, especially when we're dealing with complex ancient cultures that thought in ways totally alien to us.
Which brings us to Section 1, the digital speed trap.
When we do these unguided, lightning-fast searches, we easily fall into some major linguistic traps. Take semantic anachronism, for instance. It is so tempting to look at the Greek word dynamis and think, oh, dynamite. Paul must have meant explosive power. But dynamite wasn't even invented until the 19th century. Or we stumble into the Strong's fallacy, where we basically freeze our translations in the years 1611. And don't even get me started on relying on uncurated AI models that literally just hallucinate Hebrew syntax rules. When we let the machine do all the thinking, we're gonna stumble. To avoid these traps, our software absolutely must be disciplined by strict, human-driven guardrails. Going from the English words on the surface all the way down to the grand narrative plot requires active human judgment at every single stage. Without that critical thinking and strict methodology, our expensive software is literally just decorating a misreading with fancy Greek and Hebrew fonts. Moving right along to Section 2, our Western translation filter. The crucial point here is that reading ancient Semitic texts through a modern, post-Enlightenment lens forces the original authors into conceptual boxes they never even used. Our English translations are wonderful for daily reading, absolutely, but they routinely conceal the brilliant word clusters and historical hyperlinks that those ancient writers intentionally wove together to create one unified message.
For example, did you know Biblical Hebrew actually has no word for brain? No way, right? As modern Westerners, we constantly divide the mind and the body. But in the ancient worldview, cognition and intellect are located in the heart. And when they felt deep, agonizing distress, they located that in the kidneys. So next time you're super stressed out, you can just blame your kidneys. When we force our modern mind-body separation onto these texts, we completely lose the holistic way they viewed humanity.
And this leads us perfectly into Section 3, the true meaning of faith. This is the core focus of today's explainer, and we really need to deconstruct one of the most widely misunderstood words in our entire modern vocabulary. Look at this stark contrast. When we hear the word faith today, we almost always default to passive mental assent. We treat it as this disembodied belief, a mental checklist or just a warm internal feeling. But the ancient writers viewed faith entirely differently. They saw it as a concrete, enacted allegiance. It wasn't just what you thought in your head. It was what you actively did with your life, out in the open. So when we use our digital tools properly to look at the original Hebrew root aman and the Greek root pistis, we find words that demand public fidelity. They convey reliability and unbreakable covenant loyalty. True ancient faith is about taking an oath and living it out with your daily actions, not just giving a passive nod of agreement from the sidelines. And honestly, this completely shifts our theology. When the Apostle Paul talks about justification by faith, he is not describing an abstract courtroom transaction that happens only in your mind. He is summoning an embodied, public allegiance to the Messiah. Like Matthew W. Bates says here, saving faith is active loyalty to the risen King. Understanding this true ancient meaning completely upends our passive assumptions and calls us to a life of real, visible action. Let's see how this builds in Section 4, Recovering the Ancient Lexicon. Because, as it turns out, faith isn't the only crucial word we've been misreading. When we de-Westernize these key biblical terms, the reality of the ancient cognitive environment is truly mind-bending. Their original definitions are just vastly different from our default readings. We've already talked about faith in the heart, but let's dive into a couple more vital examples that will really reshape how we read the text. Take the word Torah. Post-Enlightenment readers tend to project this static, Greco-Roman statue book onto the word, like a massive list of impossible rules you have to follow. But Torah is actually rooted in a word that means to point or instruct. It isn't some strict merit-based legal code you climb to earn salvation. It's fatherly instruction and loving direction given to a people who have already been redeemed.
We see a very similar misunderstanding with the classification of another vital word, Elohim. Whenever we see this translated as God in English, we automatically assume it refers to the unique, singular creator of the universe. But the ancient text is far more nuanced than that, and understanding this unlocks a massive part of their ancient worldview.
In biblical Hebrew, Elohim functions as a realm descriptor for literally any inhabitant of the spiritual world. It's used for members of the divine council, territorial spirits, and famously, even the disembodied human spirit of Samuel. Recognizing this restores the Bible's actual supernatural architecture. And don't worry, it doesn't compromise monotheism at all, because Yahweh remains the completely unique, uncreated creator who rules over all other Elohim.
But listen, none of these lexical discoveries matter unless we contextualize them. Let's look at Section 5, the unfolding promise plan, to see how it all connects.
Rather than forcing our rigid modern theological systems onto the text, we have to follow what scholars call the text-immanent promise plan. It organically traces a single unfolding purpose across all of history. It starts right there with the seed conflict in Eden, runs straight through the ancient covenants of Abraham, Sinai, and David, and builds all the way up to the ultimate messianic climax. As we can see, this narrative spine holds the whole thing together. When we do our digital research, we have to map our findings onto this exact chronological structure. This ensures that our high-tech software is actually serving the Bible's own internal architecture, rather than just reinforcing our own post-Enlightenment assumptions about how the story should go.
Ultimately, what you should take away from all this is that a lightning-fast digital search is pretty much useless unless you understand the ancient narrative plot it belongs to. Technology is an amazing tool for sure, but it takes serious human textual humility to step back, read carefully, and recover the true original perspective of the authors.
So, we've dusted off the artifacts today, we've seen how our digital speed traps can easily mislead us, and we've recovered the incredible true meaning of faith, not as some passive thought, but as enacted, living loyalty. But the real question is this: now that the modern digital facade is stripped away, are you ready to read the ancient promise with ancient eyes? And will you allow these ancient words to reshape how you live your life today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.